The number one rule for writing clean functions. Now, I hate clickbait, so here's the answer. If you can't explain everything your function does in the name, then it isn't simple enough. Here's a good, well-written and simple function. It's called makeDisplayName. You pass in an object, here it's a user object, and it makes a display name for that user based on the values in the various properties. The function has no side effects, it doesn't change any variables anywhere, it just makes a new string that can be used as a display name. It makes a display name. Now let's take a look at a not so good example. Here we have a function that is called saveObject, but take a look at what this function is actually doing. It saves the object to a database, sure, but it also does some validation logic. And then down here it's posting to a message bus. Then it's mutating the object that was passed into it. I mean, this is a source of a lot of bugs when functions do stuff like this, because you aren't expecting this object to be mutated inside this function. In the return statement too, we're also creating what looks like an HTTP response object. So if we had to list out all of the things that this function's doing, it's doing validation, it's saving to a database, it's posting to a message bus, mutating the input object, and then it's creating an HTTP response. If we were to apply our rule at the start of this video, encapsulating all of that functionality into the function name, then we'd have to call this function validate, then save object, then post a message bus, then mutate, then create response. The fact that this name is very long is an indicator that our function is doing way too much. We've applied this rule of making the function name cover everything the function is doing, and it has essentially told us that the function is not very simple at all. This is the basis for something called the single responsibility principle. The single responsibility principle, or SRP, states that every class, module, or function in a program should have just one responsibility. It should do one thing, basically. And if you can't describe that one thing in a few words, then it probably isn't following the single responsibility principle. One advantage of following this principle is that it forces you to think about cross-cutting concerns. A cross-cutting concern is some code that fits together, but it isn't physically located together in your code base. So if we have a look back at our long and complicated saveObject function, the validation logic here is a cross-cutting concern. Lots of functions in your code probably do validation. There might be other places that we're checking for zero IDs or for an empty name property. So having this validation logic in this function means that that logic is spread out thinly across your code base and not grouped together as it possibly could be. Now there's a bunch of ways you can pull cross-cutting concerns like validation out and put them into one central place. Express.js, for example, has this concept of a middleware. So you can use a validation middleware like Express Validator to group all of your validation logic in one place and then pipe it into your execution pipeline for handling HTTP requests. Other programming languages have their own libraries and design patterns for addressing cross-cutting concerns. So it's really up to you to experiment with different approaches, but the single responsibility principle is what's forced us down this to think about these cross-cutting concerns and to try to tackle them. Writing clean functions is one of those things that looks simple, but it's actually incredibly difficult. So I hope you find these guidelines useful, and if you have any questions or ideas of your own for creating clean, reusable, pure functions, then pop them in the comments section below. But until next time, my name is James Charlesworth, and this is the Train to Code YouTube channel.